Oh look, more regressive leftist nuttery. This time from MTV Decoded host Francesca Ramsey, who's going to tell us again and again and again how wonderful Black Lives Matter is. Of course, no evidence of any kind will be presented from her side because facts are inconvenient to her entirely emotional narrative. So I guess I'll have to point out where she's just wrong. Not that she's going to care. So let's get started.
If you've ever heard someone say, but what about black on black crime? We've got you covered.
Meaning you're going to find some way to rationalize around not having the slightest problem with it. Gotcha!
Scrolling through your Facebook feed, you'll probably see articles and arguments about Black Lives Matter. A lot of people are mad or just confused about this movement. So here are responses to 4 questions you might hear when talking about Black Lives Matter.
But are these responses going to make any kind of sense, or can they be backed up with objective evidence? I gotta admit, I'm kinda skeptical.
Oh, so you care about black lives? Then why aren't you talking about black on black crime? First off, this assumes that the black community isn't worried about gun violence, which isn't true.
Which is not what you just said. This isn't about gun violence. It's specifically about black people killing other black people and the complete lack of outrage that we see from the black community. When a white cop kills a black man, regardless of whether this is justified or not, black people riot in the streets. But when violence erupts in some place like Chicago, where 80% of the shooting victims are black, and according to statistics, the overwhelming majority of those black victims are killed by other black people, where's the outrage? Where is BLM marching through the city streets shouting for justice? Anyone? Anyone? I mean, the overwhelming majority of these murders are never solved, but through the end of June 2016, 100% of the known assailants against black victims in Chicago have been black. That's 100%! But where's the outrage? Who the hell knows?
For example, Ceasefire in Chicago is an organization that actually intervenes in local street and gang fights. There's even a documentary about them called The Interrupters.
And that's great, but if you go to their website and look through the most recent list of advisory board members, and this dates from 2014, I don't see a single member from any identifiable black action group. Of course, Black Lives Matter was formed in mid-2013, and they're not a member, but as I said, the most recent list is 2014, and I can't say what might have happened since then. But I'm just not seeing a lot of evidence that these black groups are actually interested.
Black Lives Matter isn't just about the loss of life, which is always terrible. It's about the lack of consequences when black lives are taken at the hands of the police.
But you only want to talk about the consequences for the police. You never want to talk about the consequences that these black, lifelong violent criminals ought to have. And often, getting shot after pulling a weapon on the police, or attacking the police, or trying to grab an officer's gun is getting shot. Why don't you ever talk about that?
When a civilian has committed a violent crime, they're generally arrested, tried, and then convicted. Conversely, there's a lot of evidence that it's very rare to secure an indictment against a police officer for excessive force. And an indictment is just a trial. It's not even a conviction.
Not when there's actually excessive force. But groups like Black Lives Matter don't care whether or not the shooting was justified. They only see the race of the shooter and the race of the victim, and if one is white and the other is black, they freak the fuck out. The circumstances of the shooting are entirely irrelevant. Only the races of the people involved seem to matter to them.
Also, black on black crime isn't a thing.
Yeah, it's a thing. Going back to Chicago, that's 237 dead black men since the beginning of the year that Black Lives Matter hasn't talked about at all. No protests, no demands. They don't give a damn about those 237 black lives at all because they fall outside their narrative, which is cops suck, kill the cops, and give us money.
Blanket, fry like bacon, pigs in a blanket, fry like bacon, pigs in a blanket, fry like bacon, pigs in a blanket, fry like bacon.
84% of white murder victims were killed by another white person. But we don't call it white on white crime. That's because our communities are still very segregated. So if you have the misfortune of being the victim of a crime, the perpetrator will most likely look like you.
And that's true, but you don't have a movement out there screaming that white lives matter, is there? If there were, and it wasn't acknowledging an epidemic of white murders committed by white people, I'd be pointing out the same damn thing.
So why do people always bring up black on black crime? Because it's a diversion. They're trying to prove black citizens don't have the right to be outraged about police violence because their communities have a crime problem.
No, people bring up black on black crime because they're pointing out the utter hypocrisy of the BLM movement. They say one thing designed to get widespread support when they're really only interested in something else entirely different.
But the truth is, black people are not more violent or more likely to commit crimes than anyone else.
Not according to the FBI crime statistics. For a racial group that makes up 13% of the American population, in 2014, blacks committed 51.3% of the murders in America. They committed 55.9% of the robberies. They committed 33.1% of the aggravated assaults and 29.9% of the rapes. If blacks didn't commit more crimes than any other group, they wouldn't commit more than 13% of the crimes. But they do! Consistently! In fact, the only category the FBI tracks where blacks are at the same societal representation is DUI.
Racism, black communities have higher poverty rates, suffer from poorly funded schools, and are more likely to be targeted by police.
No, police are more likely to go there because that's where the majority of the crime is. Or didn't that occur to you, Francesca?
So are you saying blue lives don't matter? Of course the lives of cops matter. That's why if you kill a police officer, you are rightly arrested and prosecuted.
Because it's a crime to kill a cop acting in the line of duty. But what isn't a crime is a cop justifiably shooting a criminal caught in the act of violence, especially against the officer. And in the majority of these recent shootings, officers have not been indicted because there simply hasn't been any evidence to support criminal wrongdoing on their part. They did their duty against suspects who were trying to get their guns, trying to attack them, etc. But BLM doesn't like that. So long as the suspect is black, they think they ought to get away with anything, which is an inherently racist attitude.
But saying blue lives matter effectively lumps a profession into the same category as a marginalized group of people. Becoming a police officer is an occupation. It's a choice. It's not something you're born into. And most importantly, advocating for citizens is not anti-cop. The job of police officers is to protect and serve all communities.
The job of the police is to enforce the law. That's why it's called law enforcement. It is to protect the law-abiding citizen from those who are not. The fastest way to not get on the wrong side of the police is not to get on the wrong side of the law.
If that's not happening, we need to reassess and find a solution. So you're saying only Black Lives Matter? That's racist. We've talked about this before, but this movement is not saying Black Lives Matter more than anyone else's.
It's not specifically saying that, but it is purposely pushing black lives over other lives. Perhaps a better hashtag would have been Black Lives Matter too. But no, they're not really interested. You have to remember that Black Lives Matter general body meetings specifically exclude whites. They openly want racial segregation. This is a racist group. There's no denying that.
Saying Black lives should matter.
Except black lives clearly don't matter to blacks, who, as I already pointed out, aren't at all concerned when blacks are gunned down by other blacks in the streets. But that would require that they address major problems within the black community that they simply don't want to address. Instead, like all regressive movements, they only want to blame their own problems on everyone else.
But the way that our justice system, our media, and our police have been operating suggests that they do not. It's totally okay for a movement to focus on issues specific to one marginalized group. Gay bars aren't unfair to straight people. A breast cancer walk isn't unfair to other forms of cancer. And Save the Rainforest isn't saying you hate all other trees.
Gay bars don't discriminate against straight people and don't tell straight people they can't come in. Breast cancer walks don't tell people without breast cancer they can't attend. And breast cancer walks aren't blaming the existence of breast cancer on other forms of cancer.
To quote one law professor's letter, the subtext of Black Lives Matter is, because of the brutalizing and killing of black people at the hands of the police and the indifference of society in general and the criminal justice system in particular, it is important that we say Black Lives Matter.
There's no indifference. There's a realization that the majority of those black thugs who get killed bring it on themselves. These are not innocent boys and girls. These are hardened lifelong criminals who have been in prison, who attack the police, who try to escape prosecution for their crimes and reap exactly what they sow. And where police are wrong and operate outside of their legal mandate, they deserve to go down. Nobody disputes that. Nobody. But groups like BLM want all cops to go down simply because they dared to hold blacks accountable for their own actions. And that's racist.
But what about the white victims of police violence? There's way more of them. Yes, there are more white people killed by police officers than black people. But when you look proportionately within the populations, black Americans are 2.5 times as likely as white Americans to be shot and killed by police officers.
And black Americans are 4.2 times more likely to murder than white Americans. But you don't talk about that.
Black men make up just 6% of the nation's population.
Yet they commit 51.3% of the murders.
But of all the unarmed people shot and killed by police in 2015, 40% of them were black men. Those numbers are tragic.
Just because you're unarmed does not mean you don't pose a threat. What you don't mention is what these black men are doing at the time they're shot. We find in case after case after case where unarmed black men physically assault officers and try to grab their weapons and are shot in the process. This isn't some innocent black man minding his own business getting shot in the head by a rogue cop. This is a criminal engaged in violent criminal activities getting what they earned.
If an unarmed citizen is killed by the police or an armed citizen is killed under suspicious circumstances, people should be upset no matter what the victim's race. This isn't a competition.
Except to Black Lives Matter, who say nothing at all about white people being shot by black officers. This absolutely is a competition.
Sadly, police violence is a problem in many communities, but bringing up other victims to discredit the Black Lives Matter movement is pretty disingenuous.
Where police violence, demonstrable cases of rogue officers doing things that violate their legal mandate, they absolutely need to be handled. But there aren't very many of those, and Black Lives Matter, as well as lots of people on the political left, don't really care about the particulars in any individual case. They look at the races of the people involved and freak the fuck out. It doesn't matter if it was a good shooting. It doesn't matter if it was completely justified. They don't know how to withhold judgment until the facts are in, because the facts don't matter. They just react.
If you really believe that police violence is a problem, you should support Black Lives Matter, as well as other organizations fighting for victims and their families. I know these conversations are hard, but they're necessary if we want to move forward.
We can't move forward unless you're willing to be rational, but you're not. You're just emotional. All you ridiculous regressives see is race or gender or sexual orientation as the cause for everything. And when something hits your hot button, you leap up like a slice of toast and scream discrimination. There's rarely ever any evidence for any discrimination going on, but you people just have a political narrative, an emotional political narrative. Reality be damned. And that's really the issue. These people aren't thinking intellectually. They aren't willing to talk about the data. They just want to spew out emotionally charged nonsense that gets people who don't think too much to react. They're not interested in the facts. The facts get in the way of an emotionally comforting story. Their emotions get in the way of their intellectual faculties. Francesca isn't alone in this. It's a problem with the majority of the regressive left. They get upset, and they think that being upset entitles them to some kind of retribution. They don't care if they're factually right or wrong. It doesn't matter to them. They only care if their precious little feelings get hurt. And that's the sign of an emotionally stunted individual.